Our scripture verse for today is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the word of God.
In the beginning, God. That's it. No explanations, affirmations, or recommendations from higher stations because there is none. No need for vain repetition or endless definition of those words because he is the word, perfectly affirmed in and of himself. Always existing, this independent entity with Trinitarian identity. In the beginning, God, with his word, created the heavens and the earth, took this useless form, empty and void, and as his lips formed words, he formed all of creation, teeming with life, depth, and beauty. This tangible manifestation of the Father, Son, and Spirit's joyous elation in their own glorious relation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Good morning again, church. I hope you enjoyed that bumper. I'm not responsible for that video, but it was pretty epic. So it's a great video that we're grateful to our sending church, Summit Crossing. They went through Genesis quite a few years ago, and so we were able to borrow that. Again, welcome. I am grateful to be here. As I said, my name is Joel. And so if I haven't had the chance to meet you, I would love to do that sometime today. So you can see that we are beginning a new series today through the book of Genesis. Sometimes the first sermon of the year we'll do maybe a one-off vision sermon, but the reality is much of what shapes the language that we have in our vision and mission as a church, which we believe comes to us from the scriptures, but much of what shapes how we talk about discipleship actually comes to us from the book of Genesis. When we use words like the flourishing of Decatur for the good of the world and the glory of God, we believe that that has its roots in Genesis 1. So we're just going to jump right into the series this year. If you're newer to New Eden, we preach what's called expositionally typically. And so that means we will take a book of the Bible and go through it just kind of verse by verse or chapter by chapter when it's big narratives like Genesis, and just work our way through the text, allowing the text to dictate what we talk about. That make sure that we preach the whole counsel of God, that we don't just kind of pick and choose, right? And so we are going to do that with the book of Genesis throughout 2024. We have about 41 or 42 weeks planned for Genesis. And so it's going to take us up to Advent. We'll have breaks here and there. We'll have a little bit of a break over the summer. And then also when we get to Advent, we'll have that at the end of the year. But so we're just going to kind of lean in to this book of Genesis. I get excited, I think, about every series, but I've probably not been as excited for a series in a while as I have for this one. Genesis is an extremely foundational book. And so it tells us about how the world works and more importantly, how God works in the world. And it gives us purpose and identity as humans and image bearers of God, all created in God's image, no matter who we are. And so that comes from the book of Genesis is where it starts. And so what we're going to do today, today's sermon is a little bit longer than normal. So I'm just giving you a little bit of a heads up. Almost every introductory sermon, I'm going to just keep it nice and short. And it rarely is because there's a lot of content to cover. So the way it's going to look like, so you guys can just kind of settle in, we're going to spend a fair amount of time, probably half the sermon, sharing just some high-level information and some details about the book of Genesis to kind of get our bearings, so to speak, as we enter into this book, okay? And then we're going to spend a little bit of time discussing the very first verse in Genesis. Genesis 1:1 is all we're covering today. And then we're going to close with seeing how that verse and all of Genesis points us from the first pages of Scripture to the all-glorious, magnificent beauty of Christ and the good news of the gospel. Because really, that's why we're here. That's what it's all about, okay? So that's the plan. So lean in with me a little bit for the introduction. We're going to start by looking at an overview of this book of Genesis. So Genesis is the very first book of what we Christians call the Bible. I have, this is actually volume set of the Bible. If you are getting into reading your Bible this year, I highly recommend what are called Reader's Bibles. You can Google them. There's different versions. This is the CSB version, but it breaks the Bible up into, it feels more like like a book, okay? So less like these really thin pages that you can see through with really small margins and really crushed text, all smashed together. But it feels better. It mentally helps you take the Bible in as a story. And so you guys can see a little bit about Genesis. So Genesis is the first book of the Old Testament. So the Bible's split up into two testaments, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And if you guys want to see how much content there is in the Old Testament, this right here is the entire New Testament. Okay, so you guys can see a little bit how important the Old Testament is for our understanding of the New Testament. Okay, so that's the New Testament. This is the Old Testament. Genesis is one of the first 5 books, which we call the Pentateuch or the Torah. And so it is the first of those. And so it starts our whole journey into engaging with the scriptural text. And so that is important for us because it is foundational. Old, New Testament, the word testament simply means covenant. And so the Old Testament primarily deals with God's covenant with the nation of Israel, through whom God was choosing to bless the entire world. It was always the plan from the beginning. The New Testament is primarily the story of God's covenant with what's called the church, okay? Comprised of what the Apostle Paul labels as true Israel. Also the people through whom in our day and time under the new covenant that God has chosen to bless the world, all nations, tribes, tongues. That's why what we're doing here today, gathering as this small local church, has massive waves and implications because we're a part of something much bigger than ourselves. So Genesis, first book of the Bible, like I said, I think this series will serve us well to give us kind of a foundational thing. So Jared thought I should throw these books out to give them away. So heads up. I'm just joking. I'm not going to do it. He asked if I was going to throw them out, and I was like, oh, that's a good idea, but I'm not. Those are mine. Don't take them. All right. Go buy your own. All right, so where am I at? All right, so that's a little bit about Genesis. Let's talk about the author of Genesis, okay? The Pentateuch, the first 5 books, it nowhere names an author, but historically and traditionally, it has been held that the prophet Moses recorded and compiled most of it, including Genesis. Now, all of Genesis happened like before Moses was alive, right? He doesn't come on the scene till Exodus. But we believe that he's taking oral traditions that have been passed down and even compiled many years later in a very specific manner to give us the narrative as it is given to us in our day. There are some cases, most likely in Genesis, where later people came in and inserted things because there's information that Moses could not have known because the things happened after he had passed. But all that being said, we believe in the sovereignty of God and the scriptures being compiled, and we find ourselves in good company holding to the traditional view that Moses is the main or primary author and compiler of the book of Genesis. So that's the author. Who was Genesis written to? Scholars unanimously agree it was written to the nation of Israel. Most likely, Genesis specifically was given to them during their wilderness wanderings, at least in one form or another. And so as these people of God are wandering through the wilderness, wondering if God keeps his promise, they get this book, Genesis, given to them. And so we have to ask why it was written. What is the purpose of the book of Genesis? And the purpose of the book of Genesis is to remind the people of God of their identity, why they were created. What is the purpose for their existence? Whose are they? Who are they? And so even though Genesis wasn't written specifically to you, it was specifically written for you. We believe that the entire Bible was written for your edification as Christians. And so Genesis, the purpose of the book, still holds incredible relevance for us today. As a people who often find ourselves wondering, either because largely in the culture of the day, and this isn't new, Christians have always had this in every time, in every culture, or just in your own life, you're struggling. Genesis can root us and ground us in who we are, where we come from, why we exist, and more importantly, about a God who always keeps his promises. Okay, so we are literally more far removed from this text than any other Bible text that we're going to preach through, right? It's the oldest recorded book in the Bible, except maybe Job. There's arguments there. But anyways, my point here is we're far removed from it, but it has incredible relevance for us. So with that being said, we can be confident that it has relevance for us, but we also need to be humble in the way we approach this text. We are very far removed from this culture. There are many things about the ancient Near East, which is where the book of Genesis was written, that we don't understand when we just kind of cursory read the text. And so we need to approach this book with a level of humility. To really understand this book, we have to be willing to set aside our own cultural presuppositions and enter into the ancient Near Eastern culture and say, what type of literature is Genesis? What was it meaning to communicate? And sometimes people can get a little antsy when you talk about this, thinking we're trying to undermine the authority of the Word of God. We're not. We're actually trying to be faithful to the text. See, God chose to communicate his words on a page in a specific language and a specific culture. And it's been translated for us in English, but it was given originally in Hebrew. And so we need to be willing to think about that and look at God himself chose to limit himself in time and space as he communicated to humans through words, right? He chose to do this. And so we want to approach Genesis both fully trusting that it is God's word, believing firmly that that's what it is. But doing that faithfully means we are willing to take the text at what one scholar calls face value, okay? So we want to read the text as it's designed to be read. So we want to read poetry as poetry. You shouldn't read poetry as history. You're going to get pretty bent over shape. You shouldn't read poetry as science. You're going to get pretty bent out of shape. We should read sarcasm as sarcasm. There is sarcasm in the Bible. We should read a historical narrative as a historical narrative. Hyperbole as hyperbole, right? The list could go on. Okay? And so let me give you a quick example of this. If someone picked up a book 2,000 years from now that was written in our time frame, and they read the phrase that it was raining cats and dogs, okay? And I feel like that phrase is kind of falling to the wayside, but it basically means, if you don't know what it means, it's just pouring down rain outside, right? But if someone read that text, said, I'm going to read that, I'm going to take the text literally, that means that they would believe it was literally raining cats and dogs outside. That's not taking the text at face value. That's actually not a plain reading of the text. It's not faithful to the literary device that the author is employing. It's actually manipulating his words. He wasn't trying to say, or she wasn't trying to say, it's raining cats and dogs. She was trying to say, hey, it's raining really hard outside. And she's using the cultural norm and language of the day to communicate that. And so the language I like to use is we read the text literarily faithful. Because again, a literal reading, if we don't know what the text is trying to communicate, if it's hyperbole and we read it literally, we're going to get ourselves in trouble, okay? We want to understand the shared language of the day. John Walton, a scholar, he's a very trustworthy scholar on the book of Genesis. He talks about this concept using an illustration about the game of taboo, okay? My family and I played this when we were away at a cabin over Christmas break, guys against girls. I won't say who won. We'll just let y'all figure that out. But if you're not familiar, the game is like this group game. We were all trying to figure out a game to play. We're like, all right, let's play this. And we all voted on it on our phones, which is great, by the way. Get ranked voting. If you got a big group, pick the restaurant, the game you want to play, whatever. Everybody can vote. That's a total side thing. It has nothing to do with Genesis, but it'll quit you from arguing as a family. So here we go. So taboo. If you're not familiar, the game is one person. It's simple. You try to get one person to guess this word that's given to you on this card. What makes it challenging, though, is there's 5 other words that are related to that word that you are not allowed to say, any form of that word. So if the word you're trying to get people to guess is keys, maybe you couldn't say lock or house or car, things like that, right? And what's funny is research shows that with those games, the more you know that person, the better you're going to be at it, because you have shared language. So someone trying to guess the word keys, you might have a husband say to his wife, hey, I lost these this morning and you helped me find them. And she's like, oh, keys, right? And that's something no one else in the room might know, but because they have shared language and experience, they're able to understand that. So in the same way, the author of Genesis has a language that he shared, both with the surrounding Near Eastern cultures and the nation of Israel. And so there are common language and literary devices in this culture that the author of Genesis employs. And so what we're going to do is we go through it. I'm not going to go into all those right now. Our goal is, as we work our way through the text, as preachers, myself, and then some of the others that fill in, we're going to do our best to point those out when they're relevant. We're going to try not to get bogged down in them, but we will point those out to help us rightfully and faithfully interpret the text. That being said, again, I know this is a lot of content we're just going over as an introduction to the book. Let me share a quick overview of some of the main genres of literature that are contained in the book of Genesis. First and foremost, I think it's helpful to refer to Genesis as a theological narrative. Genesis is first and foremost telling us a story about God and how he interacts with humans in the world. It wants to give us a theology about who God is, his character. He is the main character of the story. We're going to see that in the beginning, God introduced, boom, right away, right? And so it is a story telling us something about God. Now, that's not saying that Genesis doesn't contain real historical facts. That's not what I'm saying. But Genesis is less concerned with rigidly laying out historical facts like a school textbook where everything's in perfect chronological order and there's dates and times. And that's not what Genesis is primarily doing. It is more concerned with shaping our minds to think rightly about God. Now, that being said, Genesis does contain real history. If you were writing a sacred book, personally, I wouldn't be including a lot of what is written in Genesis. You will see some pretty heavy stuff in Genesis if you've not read through it. Violence, betrayal, deceit, rape, prostitution, sex scandals, and many other shocking but real narratives are all throughout the book. And we'll try to give warnings for those of you that have kids in here on the weeks where we're really hitting those hard. But there's real history and things that happen in the book of Genesis. That's why it's amazing, because it's grounded in reality. You're going to read genealogies and records of ancestry. And it roots us in the stories of real people that really existed and gives us a sense of general timelines. Genesis also contains poetry. The first few chapters, the creation narrative, is extremely poetic. It's why you're going to see repetition. We read, okay, first day, it was so. Like, okay, it was good. Like, well, why are you saying that over and over? We got it the first time. No, like the author is employing poetic literary devices to try to really bring you in to focus on what he wants to communicate, okay? So again, we're going to sort that out as we work our way through the book. But remember, before anything else, big picture, Genesis is a theological narrative about God that will keep us grounded, okay? After this, I want to talk about the structure and theme of Genesis. I want to give two dangers, though, that I've seen pretty consistently when approaching the book of Genesis. First, I feel like when we get distracted from the message of Genesis, the main reason why this happens is we try to ask questions of the text that it's not trying to answer. You cannot go to Genesis and say, tell me this modern scientific answer. That's not what it's trying to do. Genesis is inspired by God. We believe that firmly. That's not what I'm saying. But God chose to limit his communication through a real culture, and it spoke in the ways that it knew best at the time, just like we do with our words in our culture, okay? The book is not primarily concerned with science. I am not saying it doesn't make scientific claims, okay? So don't hear me say that. I'm saying it's not his chief concern. It is more concerned with the metaphysical world. What is our meaning? What is our purpose? Why do we exist, right? And so that is what we've got, how we've got to approach it. So let's not ask questions of the text. It's not meant to answer. And then the other danger is to bring our presuppositions to the text. And we interpret the book through those lenses, right? We have this idea, we put God kind of in this box, and we say, all right, I'm gonna make Genesis fit all these things that either because of my religion growing up or my non-religion growing up, whatever it is, this is what I think, this is what I already believe, and we miss some of the beauty of Genesis when we do that. If we will come to the text as unbiased as we can, and we need community to do this and wrestle together, it's why we don't do this alone, it's why we don't interpret the Bible in isolation, but we do this in community. I think we will learn that there is so much richness in the book of Genesis, and they'll be way more relevant than the things that we often, I think, get distracted with when we come to books like Genesis. Revelation is another one that's like that, okay? So quickly, themes. There's a lot of themes in Genesis. I'm going to give you one main one. If I had to sum it up, it would be this: God keeps his promises. Time and time again, in the midst of humanity's rebellion, God shows up and is faithful. No matter what it looks like from our limited perspective. Genesis is given to you as this historical, theological narrative to remind you that God is going to keep his word. He's done it before, he'll do it again. We don't always understand that, right? Sometimes we doubt. Sometimes we're like little kids who don't understand what their parents are doing, and we have questions, but God is faithful. Last night, I was riding back from Florence from a basketball game with Joel Wallace, who is coaching my son's team. I roped him into that. He'll probably never do it again, but, this is just a joke. You should coach youth sports. It's great. But yeah, so anyways, we're riding back. Nobody laughed. Nobody thought it was funny. Anyways, so we're riding back from Florence. It's me, my son, and then Joel and his two kids, Paxton and Emmy, sitting in the back seat. And so KJ said he was starving, my son, so we go through Burger King, and we're riding up there, and Paxton and Emmy both said they wanted one of the paper crowns that they give you in the Burger King, when you go to Burger King. So first, they were both saying they wanted their own Happy Meal, and Joel's like, y'all just ate. Like, do you want your own Happy Meal because you're hungry or because you want the crowns? And they're like, oh, we want the crowns. He's like, well, I can get you the crowns without you each getting your own individual Happy Meal, okay? So he's like, I got them. We're going through the drive-thru. Joel is finishing up ordering. By the way, Joel's like a pretty, I don't know what the word is. Like, I don't see Joel get flustered much, but ask him to give you your order while you're sitting in the passenger seat through the drive-thru to the person, and Joel hates that. So I've learned that. So when I'm with him, I put a mobile order in and just make him say it. So that's a side note. But anyway, so Joel's finishing up his order, and Emmy's in the back. I can kind of hear, I don't even know if Joel heard her, but she's kind of whispering, reminding Joel, like, don't forget the crowns. Like, the crowns are going to be there. Like, don't forget the crowns. She's making little comments, and, Joel, she thinks he's going to forget, right? He just keeps ordering. He finishes up, and he pulls forward, and Emmy gets louder and says something like, you forgot the crown, right? And she's like, what happened? And Joel just calmly replies, like, don't worry. I told you I was going to get it. I'm going to get it. I didn't forget. So we pull up, Joel asks for the crowns, the lady gives them to Joel, and he hands it back. And I think he made some comment like, see, I told you I would get them, and I kept my word. And I didn't even tell Joel this at the time, but I've been steeped in like Genesis, and my brain just immediately went to me feeling like this little kid sometimes in the back seat, like, God, are you really going to do it? Like, don't forget, like you said you're going to do this, and I don't really trust that he is. I'm like, are you going to do it in your way? Like, I got to get both Happy Meals to get. And he's like, no, I got it. Like, I'm going to handle it, And so from our limited perspective, we're like that kid in the back seat, but no matter what, like the all-powerful God who was faithful in Genesis will be faithful to keep his promises now. So, author, audience, purpose, type of literature, theme, and lastly, in this way too long introduction, what is the structure? I'm gonna be really quick here. Basic structure. Genesis 1 through 11 records for us. It starts with creation, goes to the fall of humanity, and there's this downward spiral to the end of Genesis chapter 11, Tower of Babel, okay? Genesis 12, there's a clear break there, and then Genesis 12 through 50, we see Abraham come on the scene, and the rest of the book follows the family of Abraham, which throughout the book becomes known as the nation of Israel, where we see Joseph in Egypt, like towards the end of the book, right? And then it's taken us into Exodus, okay? So that's like one of the main ways it's broken up, just in those two big sections. You're gonna find also these clear divisions throughout the book called Toledotes in Hebrews, which is translated often like these are the records of, or the genealogies of, or the generations of. Okay, so there's 10 of these throughout the book. And when you see those come up, okay, I'm not saying you have to go sit and read every name, and still good to study that sometimes. But it's intentionally kind of moving you along in the story and kind of grounding you in the text and letting you know kind of where we're at in the story. Okay, so there's 10 of those throughout the book. The first one starts in chapter 2, verse 4, and they continue throughout the book. Okay, there's a little bit of the structure. That's all the groundwork, okay? That's it. That's your intro. So if you tuned out for that, you tune back in. We're going to do Genesis 1:1 and discuss this for the rest of the time we have remaining. Let me read it for us one more time. It's probably one of the more familiar, along with like John 3:15 or something. So we probably all know it. But it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this verse is most likely serving as a as a heading to the prologue, which takes us all the way chapter 2, verse 3, this first kind of creation account. This is like a heading to that. So it's summarizing for us what's about to be explained in more detail that we're going to look at next week. But right here we read some important things. This language of in the beginning in Hebrew, it simply means it's saying, hey, God began creation. Like before time even existed, like I don't even really know how to fully comprehend this, but God started it, right? The Hebrew scholar Robert Alter translates it this way: when God began to create heaven and earth. Like that's how he says that whole verse. It is with the creation of the cosmos that God chose to begin time itself. We don't even have concept of beginning without God starting this creation project. He's the one who has the power and authority to do so. And then right away at the beginning of the entire biblical narrative, as I said, we get introduced to the main character himself. In the beginning, God. He's just there. He is the one character in the story of the Bible that we don't get any background on and how he began, right? Well, maybe there's others, but we know that what I mean by that. God is the main character of Genesis. We need to remember that and understand that. We said that when we went through the book of Jonah. It's easy for us to turn Genesis into some moral lessons with some characters. Be good like Joseph. Don't be bad like Esau. Be good. Don't deceive like Jacob. Don't do this like so-and-so. And we talk about all these characters. Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, Esau, the list goes on. But if we do that, and I'm not saying it doesn't have moral lessons to teach us, but if we do that and forget that first and foremost, Genesis is a story about God and how he works in the midst of the lives of those characters. It is God's storyline that we are following through Genesis. The word here used for God in Hebrew is the generic word Elohim, right? It could refer to false gods, to real gods. It's used just like we might use the generic like lower G God. But we capitalize it because we know it's talking about the one true God. In chapter 2, we're going to get God's name used, Yahweh, the Hebrew name for God. But why this is important for us is in the midst of a world that had a lot to say about deities and had a lot to say about Elohims or gods, we read about this one true deity, this one true God that creates the heavens and the earth. Next week, we're going to see the process by which he does this. He does it through the Word, which is his Son, and the Spirit hovering over the waters at creation, all in union, this triune identity. But here we're simply told that God exists and that he created all things. That's what the heavens and the earth is relating. Some translators say the skies and the land. It's not meant to be like heaven is this place we go when we die. It just means the entire cosmos, right? The entire universe. Everything that exists, God created it. This is giving us what's called cosmology. You might hear this word over the next few weeks. That simply means what we believe about how the world came into being or order. Cosmos has at its root order, purpose, beauty. That's what that word has at its roots, where you get actually the root word cosmetics from and makeup. Y'all can figure out what that means. But it's the same idea, putting something in order. It's God taking the universe and putting it into order. And so right away in Genesis 1:1, it does not shy away from making some pretty bold claims about how the world came into existence and how God works. A few truth claims Genesis 1:1 makes for us. The first one is that God simply exists. God is the only being in Genesis that we're not told how he came into existence. He's always existed. And this stands in contrast to some opposing truth claims of our day, commonly called atheism or atheism, which is that there is no deity, there is no God. But here the text tells us God does exist. And what we believe about the existence of God has real world impact on our lives. For our culture, that's probably, maybe not in the South, but large for the larger like post-Christian culture, that's one of the larger, like more radical claims that Genesis makes, that God exists. Now for the ancient Near Eastern culture, everyone believed that gods existed. There was no question of whether there were powers or deities. You know, our culture, we've kind of taken the supernatural completely out of it. Everything can be understood through science and history, and we can just logically understand everything. That was not the culture this was written in. It was very superstitious, understanding deities. But there was a second truth claim that came in, which is this, that God is one. There's not many gods. Most of the cosmologies of the day from the ancient Near East would talk about how these two gods started waging war, and then this one had more power, and this other one had more power, and this one's the power of the skies and the powers of the land, and there's competing gods, competing lies. And this first verse comes in and tells us the truth, that God not only exists, but he is one. Another truth claim we see is that God is distinct from and independent of creation. Now you might think, well, this is obvious, and maybe it is for you. But in many cultures, even today, and especially in this context too, there was something called pantheism, right? So these truth claims stand against atheism or atheism, stand against polytheism, which is the idea there's many gods, but also pantheism, which is the idea that everything is God. The world, the beings, there's many cultures today that our missionaries are going to work with that believe this idea that the God is the water, and he's the sky and the seas, and he just everything is God. Right? And many cosmologies of the day had the same thing. There was like the water god who won over the sky god and all these things, okay? And so these truth claims stand in contrast to these other ideas and these cosmologies about how the world works and how God exists. And the last truth claim we see from this text, but also as we continue reading the scriptures, is not only does this God exist, not only is he one God, not only is he distinct and independent from creation, but he has made himself known. This stands in contrast to agnosticism that says we can't really know God. God is not creation, but he has chosen to create and reveal his glory, to mirror it, to image it through his beautiful creation. God is, when you walk out and look at the night sky, or you go to the Grand Canyon, you look at this massive hole in the ground, or you go to the Niagara Falls, or whatever it is that just like takes your breath away, your worship is not meant to stop there, church. That is a mirror to reflect to you the beauty of the one who spoke that into existence. The expanse of the stars, the galaxy still unknown to man, the blazing sun, the shining moon, the depth of the ocean, the diversity of creatures, great and small, both known and unknown. All of that is saying something about the power of God. I am powerful. A few years ago, I was out at our student camp, and there's not many lights out there, and so I set up my camera to take a long exposure shot, which if you're not sure what that is, it's just you take it over like a span of like 30 seconds or somewhere in there, and you capture everything that's going on. And so they were playing Night Ultimate Frisbee, a very dangerous game. It was pitch black, but everyone had on glow bracelets and a glow necklace, and there were like red and blue team, I think. And then you had a glow in the dark Frisbee that everyone's throwing, playing Ultimate Frisbee. Like pitch black, you have no idea who you're going up against. You like hit somebody, you're like, who are you? Because all you see is like little glow bracelets running around. So I'm like, I want to get this shot of like just the lights just going. And so I'm taking different ones, and then later I go to edit them, and this is what I captured. So down at the bottom, you see that's the Frisbee game, right? That's what I was actually trying to capture. And then I noticed as I was editing the picture, I was like, holy crap, like that's pretty cool. I don't know what that is. There's people smarter than me in here. Brian could probably tell you like the name of that galaxy or star. I don't even know what it is. Brian gets into this stuff. You can talk to him about this. He knows way more than I do, but takes pictures of galaxies and all these things. But it's amazing when we get a chance to sit back. Like it's wild that each of these lights represents something much bigger than our brains can even fathom. Like, and that's just what we know as humans, like with the technology that's been developed. There's so much unknown. We don't even know, like the entire expanse of the universe, the depth and the breadth and the height and the width, things seen and unseen, all spoken by the powerful word of Elohim, the one true God. He's always existed, independent of anyone else, fully fulfilled in his own triune being, this Trinitarian relationship that we're going to see next week. And out of the overflow of that joy, he says, I want to share this. So I'm going to fling stars into space, and I'm going to put planets up here, and I'm going to create the depths of these oceans. And like as we sit and reflect on this begins to fill our minds with awe. Like, and it takes time, like we reflect on it, and that's why meditation is important on the scriptures. Going out and walking around, right? People make fun of me because I don't like being outdoors much, but I won't say who that is. But it's good to get outdoors, to see the beauty of the universe. But we have to ask the question, why? Genesis wants us. It begs the question, what's the purpose of all this? Why did God fling planets and stars into space, create waterfalls and caves and mountains and caverns? Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. and the expanse proclaims the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour out speech. They're saying something. Night after night, they communicate knowledge. And he says, wait, there is no speech. There are no words, like no vocal words. Their voice is not heard, but their message still has gone out to the whole earth. There's nobody that doesn't have this opportunity to walk out and see the stars. Their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens, he has pitched a tent for the sun. It is like a bridegroom coming from his home. It rejoices like an athlete running a course. The universe exists to display the magnificent glory of God. If you're taking notes, write down Psalm 104. We're not going to read it right now. It's a pretty lengthy chapter, but go read the creation account given to us there. It's beautiful. And just meditate on the creating work of God, both in the past and his ongoing sustaining work. See, all of this is meant to display God's glory, to say you were made to worship him. At the end of Psalm 104, this is what the psalmist says after recounting the creation story. He says, I will sing to the Lord all my life. This is the response. I will sing praise to my God while I live. May my meditation be pleasing to him. I will rejoice in the Lord. You were made to find your joy and bask in the glory of our all-powerful creator. And here's the problem. Humanity, very early on, we're going to see it in Genesis 3. We have chosen to trade in the truth claims about who God is and how he is meant to be worshiped, and instead suppress them and exchange them for lies. And we begin to do what's called worshiping the creation over the creator. This is what Paul explores in Romans chapter 1. This is how he talks about creation and the evidence of God. He says, God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness, so getting rid of God, and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Since what can be known about God is evident among them because God has shown it to them. God chose to give us these. For his invisible attributes, that is, so the things that we can't see are his eternal power and divine nature. Okay, those are the invisible attributes. But then he says they now have been clearly seen. They've existed forever, but since the creation of the world, God chose to show us them. They've been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. As a result, people are without excuse. For though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God and show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became worthless and their senseless hearts were darkened, claiming to be wise. I've got all the answers. I don't need God. I can figure everything out. They became fools. And ironically, most of the time when I hear these verses quoted from Christians, normally those quoting it are talking about other people. But just keep reading Romans, guys. Paul's pretty clear. By the time you get to Romans 3, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We're all guilty of taking God off the throne as creator and the only one worthy to be worshiped, and pushing him off the throne and replacing it with other things. We might say, wait, what do you mean we worship the creation rather than the creator? Like, I don't worship trees and plants, no. But we might worship what other people think about us. We might worship self, created thing, self. Often, at least for me, my cosmology is not in the beginning God, but it's in the beginning me. I am the center of my universe. I know all things. I have great judgments and great opinions about how the world should work, and I like to try to control it and make it so. I'm reminded often of my own selfishness and self-worship, and I'm not alone. Just read Genesis, big part of the story. Another theme is how humanity keeps messing it up. Either dismissing God altogether, ignoring him, or trying to work out God's plans in their own power and their own timing. But if we're not going to learn anything else from Genesis, we're going to see that God does not give up on humans. Somehow, God consistently, time and time again, takes what was meant for evil and turns it to good. We're going to see it next week. Chapter 2, the earth was chaotic, formless, and empty. No place for human flourishing, and God takes that somehow and creates beauty and flourishing and life. He does it again at the end of Genesis when Joseph tells his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. This is what God does. He doesn't give up. And he somehow works glory out of our brokenness and our rebellion and our sin. And this is pointing us all the way forward. When this same God who spoke in the beginning, communicating to us through creation, my power, my glory, he chooses again to speak to us. This time even more clearly through the living word, the one perfect human who does not rebel, Jesus. That's what Genesis is all about. John 1, in the beginning. This isn't an accident the way he writes this, church. This author knew the Torah way better than you do. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:14, the Word, that word that flung stars into space. We talked about this at our Advent celebration. Coming out of that season, became flesh and dwelt among us. And what do we see? What is Jesus communicating? We observed his glory. The glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. More glorious than the most beautiful galaxy or the most breathtaking sunset was the face of Christ, even though no human would look at him with that. But it was God incarnate, the creator of the world in flesh, Emmanuel. God with us. There's song lyrics that express this better than I could. It says, who is God that he would take our frame? The artisan inside the paint, or breathe the very air his breath sustains, the architect inside the plans. The one who had no start and knows no end became confined in time and sense. The everlasting God, the great I am, in the mercy of a mother's hands. Hail his arrival, the God of creation. Royalty robed in the flesh he created. Jesus the maker has made himself known. All hail the infinite, infant God. The one who holds the stars in the creases of his hands is the one who holds my heart like a mother once held him. The one who knows what lies where space has run its course, embraced a baby's mind, and now I can know my God. The monarch of the stars, the king above all kings, the ruler of my heart, and the savior for my sins. The one who sees what lies in each and every soul, embraced our finite eyes, and now we can see our God. The holy word of God, defined by name, the author climbed inside the page. This God has made himself known through Christ. Just like the Spirit hovered over the waters at creation, so the Spirit hovers over the baptismal waters of the new creation. When Jesus is being baptized and coming forth out of the waters, just like land comes up out of the water in the new creation. And what do we hear a voice say? This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Humans mess up, but not this one. And this perfect human would willingly go to the cross, would enter the darkest abyss and the chaos, going forth into it once more to bring order and purpose. This uncreated being would take on the sin of rebels, those of us who exchange the worship of God for worship of created things. And he gives us and offers us his life. He created the wood that he would be hung on. He created the humans and the tongues and the lips of those humans who would cry out, "Crucify him." He created the nails and the thorns that would pierce him. He created the mountain upon which he would be crucified and the cave in which his dead, lifeless, cold-blooded body would be buried, knowing what it would cost him. But because he is the all-creating one who holds all power, the grave could not hold him. And he would rise again on the third day, inviting everyone who trusts in him to this union with God. All of this, church, you know the point of all the creation is to create a dwelling place for God and humans. Like, I'm not trying to put you up on a pedestal, but even the scriptures say you were made just a little lower than the angels. Like, what is man that you are mindful of him? God created this because he wanted a relationship with you, not because he needed you, not because he was like needy and like, man, I just need something to be fulfilled. You know, I'm just looking for a relationship. Not God. He's a triune God. He exists in perfect relationship, but out of overflow of joy and out of his own goodness and his own good pleasure, he says, I want to share this glory. I want to invite you into this union. Even more miraculous than the word creating stars and galaxies and oceans and caverns, you need to understand this, is the word creating in you a new heart. And I don't care what your journey to faith is. I don't care if you don't have a crazy testimony or anything. It doesn't matter. The fact that your heart beats and that you care at all what God thinks about you, that you even desire a relationship with him, is a testament to God alone, through grace alone. This is the gospel. It's what we call as Christians the good news. It's the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It's what you're going to get every week because it's the only hope we have. Because without it, we're in trouble. You think you can't even look at the sun. You think you can stand before the one who created the sun in your unholiness and your sin and your brokenness? You can't. You can't just waltz into that. But because of the work of Christ, you can be changed. You can be given a new heart. And this is the hope, church. When we read Genesis and we look at creation and we look at the new creation, here's the thing. If God can take nothing and create life and beauty and joy, if God can take chaos and bring purpose and order, if Jesus can get back up from the dead on Easter morning and beat sin and death, then there is still hope for you. Hope is not lost. So lift your head, weary sinner. This God who is transcendent and independent has made himself known. Yes, through creation, general revelation, but specifically and chiefly through the face of Christ. Paul says we see all of God's glory in him. This is what you were made for, church. Not to worship created things and get distracted, but to be in union with Christ. All those things, as one person said, these are but scattered beams. You are the bright sun. These are shallow streams. You are the ocean. These are just shadows, but you are the substance. You were made to find your purpose in his story. And you have access to union with the creator of the entire cosmos through Christ. God pursues us. He never gives up. So run to him. He will, no matter what it looks like. No matter if you're like the little kid in the back seat, making sure your dad doesn't forget the crown. God will be good on his word, and he will always keep his promises.